when gaming felt dangerous, and Sega ruled the nights. By the early 2000s, Sega did something almost unthinkable. They walked away from the console business, not because they stopped making great games, not because players stopped loving them, but because the system they were fighting had become too big to beat. This is the story of how Sega won the culture, but lost the billions. Because in the 1990s, if you ask kids who ruled gaming, they didn't say Nintendo. They said Sega. Gaming didn't feel safe back then. It felt risky, loud, unfinished, like something that could break at any moment. And that wasn't a flaw, that was the magic. Sega didn't just sell games, they sold rebellion, they sold identity. They sold the feeling that you were choosing a side in something bigger than a console war. While one company was quietly building control, licensing, and long-term power, Sega was building nights. Friday nights, dark rooms, glowing CRT screens, cables across the floor, controllers passed like secrets. Sega ruled the moments people remembered. But someone else was building the system that would own the future. In the early 1990s, gaming wasn't yet a mature industry. It wasn't stable. It wasn't predictable. It was a frontier. Consoles felt like experiments, not appliances. Games shipped as they were. If something was broken, it stayed broken. If something was unbalanced, that imbalance became part of the legend. And in that world, Sega thrived. The Sega Genesis wasn't just a piece of hardware. It was a statement. Black plastic instead of friendly gray. Sharp edges instead of soft curves. A startup chime that sounded like a challenge. Everything about it said this wasn't made for parents. It was made for players who wanted speed, noise, and attitude. Sega didn't try to feel safe. They tried to feel fast. Their games moved faster. Their characters looked sharper. Their marketing sounded louder. While others talked about fun for everyone, Sega talked about winning. They talked about edge. They talked about being different. You didn't just buy a Sega, you joined a side. And that mattered, because gaming was becoming something more than a hobby. It was becoming identity. Schoolyards, living rooms, and arcades turned into places where loyalty was declared. You weren't just a player. You were Sega. Or you were Nintendo. But while Sega was fighting in public, something quieter was happening behind the scenes. Because the real war wasn't being fought on screens. It was being fought in contracts. Nintendo had learned an early lesson that Sega never fully embraced. The future of gaming wasn't just about who made the coolest console, it was about who controlled the flow of games. Licensing, publishing, standards, rules. Nintendo built a system where developers needed permission to exist. Cartridges were manufactured through them, releases were approved by them. The platform wasn't just hardware, it was a gate. Sega, by contrast, treated gaming like a stage. The more voices, the more chaos, the more energy, the better. And in the short term, that worked. The early 1990s belonged to Sega in spirit. Sonic became a symbol of speed and rebellion. Games felt like they were pushing hardware beyond what it was designed to do. Arcades spilled into bedrooms. Living rooms felt like extensions of neon-lit halls and blinking cabinets. But chaos has a cost. As gaming grew, budgets exploded. Teams grew larger. Development cycles grew longer. A broken game wasn't a quirky story anymore. It was a financial disaster. A delayed release wasn't just disappointing. It was millions of dollars evaporating. The industry was changing from a playground into a business, and Sega was still playing like it was a playground. Inside the company, there wasn't one Sega. There were many. Sega of Japan, Sega of America. Different leaders, different strategies, different visions of what the future should be. Instead of simplifying, Sega expanded. More hardware, more experiments, more risks layered on top of old risks. The Sega CD, the 32X, add-ons stacked on add-ons. A growing ecosystem of products that confused customers and exhausted developers. Each new piece of hardware promised a future, but none of them became the foundation Sega needed. Every experiment cost money. Every split in the platform split the audience. Every new direction weakened the center. And then came the Saturn. On paper, it was powerful, advanced, built for a world of 3D graphics and complex games. But it was also complicated, hard to develop for, hard to explain, hard to love. Developers struggled to make it sing. Players struggled to understand what it was supposed to be. The magic that once felt effortless now felt fragile. For the first time, Sega didn't feel ahead of the moment. They felt out of sync with it. Meanwhile, competitors were doing something less exciting but far more dangerous. They were building ecosystems. They focused on making development predictable, on making platforms stable, on making sure that when a company invested millions into a game, the ground beneath them wouldn't shift. Sega kept chasing the next big idea. Others were building long-term trust. But Sega wasn't done taking risks. They launched one more console, one more leap into the future, one more attempt to outrun an industry that was learning how to slow down. The Dreamcast. It was beautiful. Clean design, built-in modem, online features before most players even knew why they would want them. Games that hinted at a connected future long before it became normal. For a moment, it felt like Sega had done it again. For a moment, it felt like they had reclaimed the future. But the future Sega built was one the market wasn't ready to follow, because by now, gaming had changed its priorities. Players wanted reliability. Developers wanted stability. Investors wanted safety. The industry no longer rewarded bold leaps. It rewarded platforms that could last for decades, systems that could scale, networks that could grow. Sega was brilliant at creating moments. Others were becoming brilliant at creating machines, and machines win over time. Every Dreamcast sold was a promise that Sega would be there in 5 years, 10 years, a generation from now. But Sega's history of sudden shifts and bold pivots made that promise hard to believe. Developers hesitated, publishers hedged. The ecosystem never fully formed. Behind the scenes, the numbers stopped working. Hardware is expensive. Manufacturing, marketing, distribution, research, support. Every console generation is a massive financial gamble. And without a powerful, loyal ecosystem of third-party developers, the math becomes brutal. Sega wasn't just competing with other consoles. They were competing with entire business models. Nintendo made money on licensing. Others built platforms designed to lock in users for years. Sega was still building experiences, and experiences don't compound the way systems do. By the early 2000s, the decision arrived. Not as a dramatic announcement, but as a quiet acknowledgement of reality. Sega would stop making consoles. The company that once defined rebellion in gaming would step away from the hardware that made them famous. The nights grew quieter. Gaming became safer, more polished, more controlled, more predictable, better in many ways, but fundamentally different. The era of major companies gambling everything on personality and attitude alone was over. Sega didn't disappear. They became a publisher, a creator of worlds and characters inside systems built by others. They still made great games. They still had influence. But they no longer shaped the battlefield, and that's what makes Sega's story more than just a tale of a lost console war. It's a story about how industries grow up. In the beginning, the loudest, boldest, most reckless players often win attention. They define culture. They create myths. They become memories. But as industries mature, power shifts. It moves toward structure, toward control, toward systems that can survive for decades instead of moments. Sega was built for chaos. The future wanted order. And that doesn't mean Sega was wrong. Some of the most important innovation in any industry comes from the people willing to burn bright and fast. The ones who don't optimize. The ones who don't wait for permission. The ones who make things feel dangerous. But the world doesn't always reward that kind of company in the long run. The nights Sega ruled weren't efficient. They weren't scalable. They weren't predictable. They were loud, messy, unstable, unforgettable. And once the industry moved on, there was no way to recreate them. Games grew bigger. Budgets exploded. Risks vanished. The magic didn't disappear, it changed shape. We didn't notice it at the time, we were too busy playing. But looking back, those nights mattered, because they remind us that progress isn't always clean, that innovation isn't always safe, and that sometimes the companies that define an era aren't the ones that get to own the future. Sega ruled the nights when gaming felt dangerous. But the industry chose systems over sparks, and in that world, the billions didn't follow the rebels. They followed the builders.